Welcome to this presentation entitled Venturing Towards Independence, Building Resilience in Learners. My name is Mr. Chris Shaw. I can be found on Twitter via @athrosaesneg. I'm also working this year as an MIE expert, and I work at Ysgol Gyfun Gymraeg Bryn Tawe, which is a Welsh medium school in Swansea. So in this presentation, I'm going to be talking about how we launched a curriculum at our school entitled the Venture Curriculum. As we're a Welsh medium school, that translates to Curriculum Mentor. Now, why we felt the need to promote this venture curriculum, or why the need to venture? Well, I think like lots of schools, initially it stemmed from us feeling as a school community that we needed to promote students' capacity to work independently. That was the main driver when recognising the need to venture. And I think the concerns noted here, concerns probably echoed in lots of schools up and down the country, specifically perhaps in light of the current situation that we find ourselves in. So there were concerns over learners' ability to work independently, perhaps an over-reliance on a teacher-led approach that I think in secondary we can sometimes recognise within our practice. That there was a perceived lack of transferable skills and knowledge, that learners, for example, would be able to use a revision strategy in geography that they then wouldn't be able to transfer to a different learning context. A lack of engagement with homework or independent study. Again, I think that's something that our venture curriculum has tried to tackle. And perhaps finally, an insufficient awareness of revision strategies and study skills. So when learners are getting to years 10 and 11 or the sixth form, not being able to draw upon a range of appropriate revision strategies. So if we were to tell them, for example, in an English classroom that they need to prepare essay plans, well, would those learners be equipped with the skills necessary for creating that kind of resource? So when I was tasked with this idea of coming up with a project to develop a curriculum which promoted independence, then there was obviously lots to do in terms of research and development in establishing this programme. So this included a visit to the much debated Michaela School just outside Wembley in North London. And really the reason we sort of engaged with Michaela School, we wanted to think about the big focus that they place as a school on knowledge and sort of disciplinary learning, and again sort of trying to think about how they were able to promote learners' capacity to work independently. So it was very much an interesting visit and something that sparked lots of ideas. We also consulted with Successful Lives, and there's a really good book that I would definitely recommend called Building Resilience, which is all about how lessons perhaps learned in the business world can be applied within an education environment. And we also collaborated with lots of other schools. We're particularly grateful for the input offered to us by Treorchy Comprehensive School. And again, I'd say that their pioneering prep programme is something that we learned a lot from when we were going through stages of research and development for our venture curriculum. And we were really guided by this really interesting report by the Education Endowment Foundation on promoting learners' sort of cognitive skills. And there were three things we picked out from this. The idea that it's important to explicitly teach pupils metacognitive strategies. And I think what we felt is that the venture curriculum would offer an opportunity for our staff and for our learners to benefit from this explicit teaching of those skills. Set an appropriate level of challenge to develop pupils' self-regulation. And I think sometimes when we talk about independent learners, it can be seen as some sort of educational holy grail. And actually, I think it was working towards independence and working towards this status of self-regulation is what we were actually aiming towards. And then finally, the importance of explicitly teaching pupils how to organise and effectively manage their learning independently. We felt that through a venture curriculum, we would be able to get to grips with this and to offer a platform. Because as often happens in secondary schools, when it comes to these sort of cross-curricular skills and competencies, there's a danger sometimes of a piecemeal approach where one can say, oh, this should be history's responsibility, or this should be the responsibility of the mathematics department, or now as we venture towards curriculum for Wales, that it comes under the to-do list of areas of learning and experience. And what we felt is that by offering or creating a bespoke program, that we would be able to explicitly deal with these kinds of skills. So as you go through research, and one of the mantras I think of effective research that I've definitely drawn upon is coming up with this idea of cornerstone texts. So that's not to say that the books I'm about to mention are superior to others. It's just we felt as a team who were researching and putting this curriculum together, these were texts that we kept going back to in terms of references. So one of which is retrieval practice, just because I feel that this is something that we, I think, as a result of the venture curriculum, have really strengthened as a whole school focus in terms of pedagogy. So retrieval practice is something that we feel is really something that's critical to the success of lessons and, more importantly, to the success of long-term learning. Science of Learning by Bradley Bush and Edward Watson, who also work with the company InnerDrive, and I'll elaborate on their input later, but they have been fantastic, and this I would definitely recommend. This as a must read. 77 studies that every teacher needs to know, and lots of our teaching within the venture curriculum is based on these well-researched and well-informed principles. And then finally, what does this look like in the classroom? This was a text that I reread and reread again a lot when we were setting up the principles of the venture curriculum. And it really is can be boiled down to the quote that we were quite keen to share with staff when we were working on this curriculum, that independence is certainly not something that's going to happen overnight. And perhaps more importantly, that independence does not necessarily seem the best way to become independent, that this isn't something that we could divulge or divert responsibility onto the students straight away. This is something that had to be acted upon and worked upon as a process. So again, I'm still focusing here on research and development. We gained a lot from what the Learning Scientists website has to offer, especially when exploring concepts like space practice. That's something I think we definitely wanted our students to benefit from. Again, I think we learned a lot from Impact Wales. They offered a fantastic 2-day training course on cognitive science in the classroom, and I think lots of what was learned during those training days. And again, it was important, and I should stress here, that all of the staff delivering this program had access to these training materials. And again, there was lots for us to learn. And during those training days from Impact, Dr. Carolina Quepper-Tetzel, she delivered one of those training days, and there was lots of fantastic input there, and I would definitely recommend following her because she's a total expert on cognitive science, and we gained a lot from those sessions. So in essence, when we talked about developing this kind of curriculum, it was all about changing mindsets. So as opposed to this image of pouring facts into learners' heads, this concept of spoon feeding or schools being seen as exam factories, teaching to the test. And what we felt could be perceived by some as a dependency culture, and shifting that towards learners who foster curiosity, who are resilient, who do demonstrate aspects of growth mindset thinking, and more importantly, have the capacity for self-regulation and for independence. So I think a key sort of message when we set up the curriculum was getting parental engagement and getting parents on board with what we intended to do with this kind of curriculum. And it started with a poster which appeared in every single classroom, which was just shifting, again, the mindset a little bit, where we call it the pathway to success. And, you know, almost this sort of 3 before me, the 5 steps we would expect all learners to consider before asking for the teacher input. Now, that's quite a, you know, a tried and trusted method, but it was just the first step we took on this road towards building this venture curriculum. So what is it all about then? Well, essentially what the venture curriculum has come to pass as is that it offers a weekly bespoke lesson with a learning coach, who is often the form tutor as well. The lesson always happens either lesson 1 or 2, so it's in the morning while learners are sort of ready and equipped to face the challenges of the day. And specifically, we launched the venture curriculum with our Year 8 cohort. And there was lots of thinking behind why would we launch it with Year 8. There can be a sense sometimes in secondary that after transition, Year 7 get a lot of focus and attention. Year 8 perhaps feel not ignored, but feel sometimes as if it can be, you know, a year where you're not transitioning to Key Stage 4, maybe a little bit of a lost year, so to speak. So we felt actually starting something new and exciting would be really, really useful with our Year 8 group. And it runs on a 2-year cycle for Year 8 and Year 9, with the hope then that the skills can be built upon as they go into their GCSE. It includes the explicit teaching of revision and study skills. So we may, for example, teach Year 8 how to, the principles of dual coding. And this is something we would then expect departments to sort of contextualize as we go on. One of the really interesting principles with the venture curriculum is that we do, with our learners, share the science of learning. And I'm not specifically referring to the text I mentioned earlier, but we talk about the research behind why, for example, spaced practice is a much more useful revision tool than chunking or cramming towards a test is. And I think that's a really, what stands out for the learners is that they get to grips with the thinking behind these ideas. We offer contextualized examples for learners. So if Year 8 are learning all about the importance of how to create really successful notes, or note-taking skills, we would then say, right, in English at the moment, you're studying Macbeth and sort of Jacobean attitudes towards witchcraft. So we would then ask them to sort of practice those note-taking skills in a very, very relevant context. Or say if they were learning about mind mapping and then they were looking at a new concept in mathematics, they would practice the technique in a very contextualized way. And I think that's something that's really important. It sort of led to a whole school focus on retrieval practice, which is something I still think we're developing now. And the venture curriculum, as it sort of evolves, is now developing to include units and focuses on careers education, financial literacy, because that's something that definitely came from student voice that they wanted to know more about. And community enterprise projects, which I'll mention a little later in the presentation. So in terms of sharing the science of learning with them, we would, for example, when looking at revision or space practice, we would show them Ebbinghouse's forgetting curve and actually try and apply that to their own learning. Now, I think initially we were a little bit skeptical, how would this go down with a group of Year 8 learners? But I think what's sort of become evident as we've gone through this journey with them is that they actually really appreciate the fact that we are sharing these findings with them. And I think it gives them a little bit more it gives the strategies we're sharing with them a little bit more credibility. And I would say that's a clear advantage. Moving on then, I mentioned Inner Drive earlier on, and Inner Drive have got some fantastic resources on metacognitive strategies and revision skills. So what we did with them, and we're forever grateful for their input, is we worked in collaboration with them, and we've translated some of these resources. So we would be sharing with students the 9 best ways to use retrieval practice, or in this case, the 7 steps to improve student resilience. And I think, sharing these high quality resources has definitely helped our learners. And if you walk along the corridors at our school, then you'll definitely see lots and lots of these posters. So then, what it's led to amongst our learners as well is a really, high standard of work when it comes to applying those revision strategies. So we've got a learner here in Year 8 who was talking, who'd learned about the principles of dual coding and has applied these to Wilfred Owen's Dulce et Decorum Est. And you can see this is a fantastic example of applying those principles. We've had learners go off to create flashcards. There's an example here in Poetic Devices. They've been using dual coding to to learn about the Tudor period in history, and we've even got somebody here practicing the Cornell note-taking approach to science. So there's a huge contextual range of subjects that they've applied these skills within. And then, again, it's not just about academic strategies. I think it's wider than that. And we do feel that the venture curriculum offers us an opportunity to really promote student well-being. So we talk a lot about, things like communication. There's a section here on self-talk, why self-talk and positive reinforcement is important. And again, it's all based on well-researched cognitive science. And this is something I think our learners have benefited from as well. As we move it into Year 9 then, obviously the challenge of our approach steps up a little bit. So, as well as sharing with them what we feel works well as effective practice, we'll also share with them what's less effective. So on this slide here, we've got revision, what doesn't work. So we'll talk about misconceptions that highlighting and underlining is a really useful revision tool. And sometimes, they can be a little bit affronted by that, but it does open up some interesting discussions. We talk also about, the idea of listening to music while you revise. And I always share the statistic with them that listening to music while you revise makes that revision practice, I think, 33% less effective. And that's something they always try and counter, but it does open up some interesting dialogue when we're going through it with them. Okay, and again, we talk about testing effects and 6 reasons why testing is important, how students can revise effectively. And again, we're really, really grateful to the team at Inner Drive who've been a fantastic support as we've gone through the steps of putting this curriculum in place. We've also been working more recently now with Year 9 within their venture lessons on raising aspirations. We've been doing some work with Careers Wales. They get an opportunity to think about career pathways and jobs for the future. And as well, you can see me here on the right-hand side with a former pupil who works for Imperial College in London now on epidemiology of all things. But the reason I filmed a series of interviews with former learners was, again, as part of the venture curriculum, we're quite keen to raise aspirations. So it's an opportunity for our current crop of students to question former pupils on how they've used their learning and how they've progressed within their own careers. I mentioned a community enterprise. I know lots and lots of schools work with First Give. I would definitely recommend it. And again, in Year 9, our venture curriculum offers an opportunity for learners to engage with this community-based initiative, which encourages social action. And they've really become enthused by taking part in these projects. And it's good preparation as well, I would argue, for things like the baccalaureate and the challenges that lay ahead of them into GCSE. Okay, so in terms of student voice then, again, we're just quizzing students not just on how much they enjoy or how much they feel the venture curriculum benefits them, but we're asking them explicitly to sort of name revision strategies that they have found useful. So in this graph here, mind maps and flashcards have shown up as quite useful revision tools. And then we've asked them, in terms of health and well-being, what more would they like to learn about? So lots of them mentioned that they would like to do more on mindfulness. We've done some initial sort of mindfulness sessions, and healthy eating appear there as quite strong scores. And after we initially sort of delivered the venture curriculum, we had a lovely email from a parent here who talked about having attended the presentation evening, and just really shared with us how they felt it was a really useful thing for the school to be offering. So what I'm trying to say here is, if you don't take my word for the success of this scheme, then this definitely sort of consolidates the key messages. And talking about, I suppose, how industry and business also promote these kinds of transferable skills. I do like the reference at the end there to whatever field they venture into, and that ties in quite nicely with our message. Estin's thematic report on preparing for the curriculum for Wales does include a reference to our venture curriculum as well. I think, again, we're quite proud of the fact that it's built from just study skills to more aspects like digital learning and financial literacy. And I do feel as well that definitely as part of this provision that it has strengthened the role of the teacher as a learning champion or a learning coach. And there's a link there if you did want to look at that Estin thematic report. Finally then, in terms of how we're venturing forward in reference to the curriculum for Wales, I think we definitely see crossovers with the opportunity to really develop and consolidate, I think, what's labelled in the new curriculum for Wales guidance as integral skills. These sort of cross-curricular capacities that we want learners to foster. I definitely think the principles of the venture curriculum underpin the work of the AOLEs. Hopefully what's become evident during my presentation is that the venture curriculum can certainly be closely aligned with the 4 purposes. And there's an incremental focus on well-being, which we're planning in conjunction with the relevant AOLE at our school. I think we're seeing it as an opportunity to raise aspirations, and as I said, we're introducing elements like financial literacy and the First Give project. So hopefully you found that useful in terms of sharing with you a little part of our journey, and it's still very much a journey as we look to develop our learners' capacity to be independent and, as it says in the title here, to build resilience. Thank you very much for listening.